6:37. All right, so we talked, is the red light on the phone? All right, I'll edit this later. So we just, before we left, we were talking a bit about breath meditation and the various, one of the ways that is common to practice breath, or is good to start with, you can just count, you know. But it can actually be kind of any kind of mental word one wants to repeat. You can. Not a negative mental word, you know, but usually in the Thai tradition, the kind of standard one that people start with is Buddho. So on the in-breath they say Bud, on the out-breath they say Do, you know. And then in the Zen tradition they use these kind of koans. You know, so when I first started, it was in this Zen tradition, they give you this kind of riddle. And you just keep repeating it, you know, kind of this word, you know, that you go through over and over again. And it can be anything. You can use counting or whatever. And this is just a kind of way to keep one's mind fully with the breath, all the way on the in-breath, all the way on the out-breath. Now, this is one kind of way of practicing breath meditation, but actually there are kind of many. And one of the most important, I guess you could say, tools or skills to learn in breath meditation is how to manipulate the breath. So there's these two aspects of breath meditation that come together. On the one hand, breath is a process that one of the only kind of automatic processes in the body that we have conscious control over. And so there's a time in breathing meditation when it's better not to mess with it. You just kind of let it flow in, let it flow out, let it flow in, let it flow out. But there are also other times that can occur, you know, quite often where it's good to manipulate the breath. And so there's various ways that we learn about the process of karma. We learn about the way that the mind interacts with the body through observing our breath. You know? This is some of the things that the Buddha quite possibly means when he says, you know, breathe in and out, contemplating impermanence. Breathe in and out, you know, doing all these things. All these things are present in the kind of interaction between the breath and the body. And so with this kind of breath meditation, what one notices is that the breath is not just this kind of physical element of air. You kind of have this kind of, sometimes taught in science, have this kind of ideas. Breath that just goes in through the nose, hits the lungs, and kind of goes back out. But in most kind of, or many religious teachings, at least in Taoism and you know, Hinduism, Buddhism, breath is actually this kind of energetic system. So it's kind of this energy that's all around. You know? So we learn when we practice breath meditation to change our perception of the breath, so that it isn't just kind of air that we just have to pull in and out of the lungs, but it's this kind of energy, and we learn to shift our imagination so that instead of just being able to pull it in and out of the lungs, it's possible to pull it in and out of any part of the body, you know, that's necessary to pull in and out of. And the reason why one wants to do this is because the whole purpose, or one of the aims of breath meditation, is to make our mind calm, you know, to be able to stay fully with the breath on the in-breath, on the out-breath, and to have that breath be comfortable. You know? So if the breath is choppy, if we're breathing in and all of a sudden our body tenses, you know, if we're angry or whatever, suddenly our body tenses. If we're anxious, suddenly our body tenses. It interrupts this kind of calm flow of the breath. So this is where it comes into learning various ways to manipulate it, you know, various ways to try to make it calm. You know? And so one of the things as well that one notices when one sits down to meditate, in addition to this fact that, okay, the breath is this kind of, you know, it seems to be going everywhere here, you know, not just in my lungs, is that there can be a lot of tension in the body, you know, and various types of tension, various places of tension. Sometimes there's areas in the body that one actually can't feel, even if one directs one's attention to them. So there was one monk I know, he couldn't feel his elbow. Somehow he just could not send his awareness there and feel his elbow. You know? Basically the idea is wherever there's a kind of tension in the body, this is a kind of, it's like an anchor for a thought. You know? So one of the interesting things that we learn is that, you know, our thoughts and our body aren't totally separate. You know? Kind of various ways that we tend to think all the time has an impact on our body, has an impact on the way we hold tension through our body. Sometimes various memories that we have cause tension in our body. The body locks up around a particular thing, and then our whole body structure gets pulled into or out of place around that. So there was one monk who I really respect and admire. His name is Ajahn Thanissaro, and he teaches about one time he was young, and or one time he was meditating. He had this terrible kind of pain in his foot. He could never get rid, or not pain, but this tension in his foot. He could never get rid of it, and he kept meditating, kind of relaxing the areas around his foot, trying to get his body calm in all these ways. And then one day, this area in his foot relaxed, and he had this kind of vivid memory of when he was young. He jumped off this barn. He used to live on the farm. He jumped out of this kind of, the barns have these kind of like a top windows that they would push hay out of. And he jumped out of that onto a pile of hay below, but there was a nail in the hay, and it went through his foot. And so he had this memory the moment this kind of tension relaxed of this kind of nail. And so he'd been carrying around this kind of memory in his foot this whole time. So this is another reason why it's good to learn about the ways that manipulate the breath to relax various parts of the body, because the negative or positive emotions that one might feel have anchors in the body. It's not just in the brain. These kind of things go out and spread throughout our body. So for this meditation session, we can spend maybe 15 minutes or so. And we'll just go through some of the various what they call resting points of the breath. And in Hinduism, these are kind of known as chakras, kind of these centers, I guess, where the breath energy tends to, like little intersections, where the breath energy is going through the body, it goes there. So there's one at the crown of the head, one between the eyes. There's probably more too. And we go to the tip of the nose, the base of the throat, at the center of the chest by the heart, solar plexus, so near the belly button, and then at the just in front of hip bones is also another center. So the way that this one monk teaches meditation, which I like, is one can go through and learn to relax all those various areas. And any kind of tensions or tightness, one learns to continually relax them, try to make one's body calm. Okay? So we can get our bodies into position as we did before. Okay, and we can look about 3 feet in front of us and close our eyes. Okay, and we can focus in on the breath. Can know when it's coming in and know when it's going out. If we breathe in a long breath, can just know I'm breathing in a long breath. And if we breathe in a short breath, can just know I'm breathing in a short breath. And can focus in on the breath at the tip of the nose. And if one notices any patterns of tension or tightness around the nose or the face, one can just let those relax. One can either just allow them to relax on their own, or one can imagine breath energy just gently working through any knots of tension or tightness as one breathes in and as one breathes out. And when focusing in on the breath, don't want focus to be too heavy, and also don't want it to be too light. So we want focus to be heavy enough that our mind doesn't run away to the past or the future. But also want it to be light enough that the body doesn't get tense. So just the right amount of focus. And one of the metaphors that the teachers use for this is like teaching a child how to walk. So we don't grab the child so tightly that it can't walk at all, but we also don't go so far away that if the child fell, it could hurt itself. So in the same way, you can try to make focus on the breath just right. Okay, and can shift attention a bit. This time up to the area between the eyebrows. And if notice any patterns of tension or tightness between the eyebrows, you can just let those relax. And can practice breathing in and out from this area between the eyebrows. And to do this can be helpful to change one's perception of the breath so that it's not just air that one's pulling in and out of the lungs, but it's a kind of energy that's all around and coursing through the body. And is possible to pull into and out of any part of the body one might like. Through skin, through skull, almost as if there was a little mouth there between the eyebrows, pulling in breath energy from all directions. Okay, and can shift attention again a bit. This time up to crown of the head. And this is just the area where if one were to pull a string from the last vertebrae in one's spine, out the top of the head, this is roughly the area where the string would exit. So just at the top of the head in the center there. And if we notice any patterns of tension or tightness at the crown of the head, and can just let those relax. And can practice breathing in and out from the crown of the head, almost as if there was a little mouth there, pulling in breath energy from all directions. Okay, and can shift attention again. This time jump down to the base of the throat. And this is just the area where the collarbone meets the neck, kind of in the center of that little dip in the collarbone. And if one notices any patterns of tension or tightness at the base of the neck, and one can just let those relax. And one can practice breathing in and out from the base of the neck. And to do this can be helpful to change one's perception of the breath, so that it's not just air that is pulled in and out of the lungs, but is a kind of energy that's all around and coursing through the body. And is possible to pull it into and out of any part of one's body one might like. Through skin, through flesh, almost as if there was a little mouth there at the base of the neck, pulling in breath energy from all directions. Okay, and can shift attention again. This time down to center of the chest. And this is just the area to the right of the heart, in the center of the rib cage. And one can follow the same steps again there. So just relaxing any tension, and then breathing in and out from this area at the center of the chest. And can shift attention again. This time down to the solar plexus. And this is just the area where the rib cage ends, in the center there. And can follow the same steps again there. So if notice any patterns of tension or tightness, can just let those relax. And can practice breathing in and out from the solar plexus, almost as if there was a little mouth there, pulling in breath energy from all directions. And can shift attention again. This time down to belly button. And can follow the same steps again there. And can shift attention again. This time down to base of one's body. And this is the area just in front of one's hip bone. And can follow same steps again there. And can change perception again. This time can watch the breath as it comes in through the nose, down past base of the neck, past center of the chest, past solar plexus, past belly button, to the base of the body and back again. And when watching the breath in this way, it can be helpful to loosen focus a bit so that it can take in a bit larger area. And when breathing in and out in this way, might have noticed a place where it felt particularly comfortable to breathe from. Could have been crown of the head, between the eyebrows, tip of the nose, base of the neck, center of the chest, solar plexus, belly button, base of one's body, or it might have been anywhere in between. And if that's the case, then can just let one's attention rest there. But if no place in particular stood out as comfortable, can just pose the question in one's mind, where would be a really good place to breathe from right now? And then let one's awareness settle there on its own. And from the spot where it felt particularly comfortable to breathe from, one can let awareness spread until it fills one's whole body. And one of the metaphors they give for this in the canon is like a lake with an underground source, and the water comes up from the underground source and fills the whole lake. And in the same way, one can let awareness spread until it fills the whole body. And with awareness filling the whole body, one can practice whole body breathing. And when breathing in and out from the whole body, can be helpful to change one's perception of the breath, so that it's not just air that one's pulling in and out of the lungs, but it's a kind of energy that's all around and coursing through the body. And it's possible to pull into and out of every pore in the body. Almost like the body was a big sponge. So on the in-breath, one can think whole body. On the out breath, whole body. Okay, so there's a bit of breath meditation. Did anybody have any questions about some of the things we talked about before meditating? Resting points of the breath and all that kind of stuff? Is everybody good?
Bhante, is there a particular sutta about this kind of thing, like chakra and energy?
I've never read, although it probably comes under like learning to calm and relax the body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that the Buddha actually didn't talk about because they're not probably necessary.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
But that's one of the things when we go to meditate. You know, we start to learn about what he said about the kind of handful of leaves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in other words, he taught about a handful of leaves, but the amount of Dhamma that's out there is like the leaves in the forest. So start to see things that, you know. I mean, they're there in the suttas, but they're like a sentence. But for us, they might be like a huge part of our practice. Mm-hmm. So resting points of the breath is something that people teach. Other questions about that?
What is that Sabbakaya Patisamveda, that whole body?
That's in Anapana Sutta, right? It's one of the stages, right? When you go from the start, Sabbakaya. That's from the whole body.
Yeah, so that we did last.
Mm-hmm.
So, So that's the last one we did. So kind of learning to relax the whole body. Once the whole body's relaxed, then people can learn to develop a kind of awareness of the whole body, breathing in and out. And this is said to be kind of one of the, we're talking about ways you could go off while meditating. This is a nice, safe way to meditate because it keeps our mind grounded in our body. So a lot of the times, especially if you're a monk, you'll be walking down the street and you'll meet somebody and they'll be like, yeah, I started meditating and I was looking out in my room and looking at stuff and my mind flew. People say that. I've had like 3 people. Sometimes we wonder, well, I don't know if this guy's imagining this, but could happen. That happens to some people. In any event, that's something that you probably don't want to mess with that much at the beginning because people can have bad results from that. So the whole body is something very safe, very grounding. And it's also something that can link in well with knowing our emotions because they all have a kind of basis in our body. So we learn to use this kind of breath meditation as what they call our satipatthana. It becomes our frame of reference for interacting with the world. So I'm interacting, something's gone wrong with my body here. What's that? Gives us a kind of sense that something's happening. We learn to relax that. It has an effect on the emotion that might otherwise arise. So this whole body breathing is something important. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you're focusing on the points that you talked about, if you're feeling tension anywhere else, is the practice to avoid that and keep focusing where we're supposed to be? Or?
No. So that's a good question. So. This is these points. It's not like a method, really. Like you have to do that, but the principle behind it is that we want the whole body to be relaxed. We want to be able to breathe in and out really comfortably through the whole in-breath, through the whole out-breath. We want our mind to be focused the whole time. It's breathing in and out, but not in a tense way. And then when we do that, we eventually want feelings of like a rapture to arise in the body. Yeah. So this is the kind of the goal, the calm parts of meditation, the parts we're aiming at calming the mind, is having this, eventually developing this kind of sense of pleasure that comes solely from meditation. And so in other words, there's a principle to it. That's what we're trying to do. So if there's tension in other parts of the body, we can go and relax that. But then it's also a middle path because, you can spend whole day zipping here and there in your body and like never stop. There's an endless flow of sensations in the body. It's just never going to end, right? So there's a kind of balance point to it too. Something we have to become skilled with. So that brings us actually to kind of important points of the last part of the meditation. After we went through and relaxed all the portions of the body, then what we learned to do was there's 2 parts to this. One of the ones we can touch on right now is we learned to kind of spread awareness throughout the body. And so this is actually a skill that occurs really often in the passages in the canon. In other words, when we have a feeling in the body, we can learn to spread that. So often they have like a particular location. If we learn to spread it throughout the body, it has a different effect. So this is particularly the case with feelings of rapture or pleasure that arise solely from meditation. This is why it's important to if there's parts of our body that are blocked in our awareness, we learn to kind of loosen the tension around those so that our awareness can settle in them. Because this is another point where kind of this feeling of rapture or pleasure can spread to. So this is a kind of very good skill to have. And this is why the Buddha gives various metaphors for it. In the first jhana, it's like a skilled bathman. In the second one, it's a lake, I think. That's the second one. I can't remember the third one now. The fourth one is somebody wrapped in white cloth. In all these situations are these pleasant feelings are grounded in the body. And so this is kind of the calm portions of meditation, which are called jhanas. So these are actually very kind of important to develop actually nowadays through possibly a commentarial interpretation of the suttas, tend to have what you see this kind of dichotomy. People think there's vipassana and they think there's samatha. And they think vipassana is really fast and samatha is really slow. Or some people think samatha is the only way to go and there's nothing to do with vipassana. Actually, these terms, they don't so much occur in the Buddha's teachings on meditation. these terms in and of themselves. In other words, all of these kind of meditation topics that we do have an element of what we call this calm focus to them. All of them have more or less an element of investigation. You know? So for us to even find where attention is in our body, we have to investigate. You know? For us to relax it, we have to calm. You know? For us to have our mind focused on meditation, in a sense, we have to direct our mind to that. You know? And then this kind of calmness is more this kind of relaxed feeling. So in other words, it's this balance between these two faculties, what you might call the faculty of intuition and the faculty of kind of intelligence or investigation. You know? So when we first start to meditate, we learn to focus on this object, when we meditate, we learn to focus on this object all the time as our kind of engagements with the external world lessen. You know? Then our mind starts to settle into the object, and kind of these feelings come up, you know? This feeling of kind of like rapture, this feeling of kind of pleasantness, this feeling of happiness. And you can tell that this is a different feeling from any feeling you might have had before. You've never experienced that, because it's more pleasant than anything anything a person might have experienced before. You know? So that's the first thing. That's why it's called rapture, a kind of bliss. You know? It's this kind of extreme joy. It can start small, but it's different than the types of joys you get by like eating things. So if these kind of jhanas, these kind of spiritual joys are the kind of more wholesome and fulfilling joys. And this is a kind of important type of joy to develop because, as we mentioned, one of the things that pulls us off with all these defilements is that there's actually an element to them that we like. You know? So hatred, there's an element to it we like. You know? Craving, there's an element to it we like. Delusion, there's elements to it we like. That's why it's hard to cut them. You know? So when we just cut them, that's why we don't start talking. So even talking about food, right? Like, okay, contemplate the loathsomeness of food. It's like, whoa, you know? I mean, you know, it can seem like, whoa, why am I going to, you know, what's wrong with food? Okay, that's the part of the mind. We need food. But there's a part of the mind that loves to eat, you know, loves the sensations that come from eating, loves the company that's associated with sharing meals, loves the act of preparation, loves all these things. And we say, cut off our craving to it, there's threat. In other words, part of our happiness in our life is sustained by some of these defilements. So when we learn to develop a type of happiness that's solely dependent on meditation, solely dependent on wholesome qualities, solely dependent on focusing on the mind, what we have is a firmer basis. You know? When we have this kind of firm basis, then getting rid of some of these things we really love doesn't seem as threatening. Right? We've got something better. And in fact, going out to do these things that are bad, they destroy our opportunity to have these kind of pleasant feelings arise in meditation. So right here, when we develop these things, when we develop this calmness of the mind, keep bringing it back to the breath, calm over and over again, you know, when it develops, then we end up with this kind of like litmus paper. I don't know if you guys remember science class back in the day, you put like a little drop or whatever. If it's acid, paper changes color. Right? And so it's the same thing when our mind is calm. We can see much more clearly what type of actions are having a negative effect on the mind. You know? If we've got a kind of paper that's all kinds of multicolored different colors, kind of been going out and gobbling this and that, it's all, you know, hazy, then whatever drop you put there, you're not going to notice. You know? So this is one, oh yeah, sorry, Amina?
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, so this is one of the kind of important portions of learning to calm the mind. This is this samatha aspect to meditation. It's present in all the various objects of meditation, but more so in objects like the breath, the four Brahma Viharas, these kind of things. They're more just kind of focused on one object. You know? So the other type of meditation, what they often call vipassana, this also has an element of samatha, is where we actually send our mind out to investigate things. You know? Now this is where our defilements actually get cut. You know? Just kind of bringing our mind back to a state of calm over and over again, we can have this sense of pleasure arise, a sense of bliss, and it can be like, whoa, this is great. But after a while, it goes away, and they come back. You know, it's like somebody who, a lake that gets very, very still. You know, it seems like nothing is ever going to disturb the stillness. It's very still. And then all of a sudden there's a ripple in the lake. Maybe some wind comes and it ripples. And the wind hasn't gone away. It just got still. And wind can come again and whip it up into into huge waves, right? So this is why we have this other type of meditation, which is, well, not other type, but we have meditation topics that are more focused on what we might call the intelligence. Intelligence is a rough word. This investigative aspect of the Buddhist teachings. These are ones that are aimed at giving rise to dispassion. Ones like contemplation of impermanence, the loathsomeness of food, contemplation of death. These are all the things that seem really loathsome, but when we have this solid basis of pleasure in our from meditation, we have the kind of happiness that comes from practicing the Dhamma. It's not threatening to investigate those things in the same way. Our mind can launch out towards them. So that's one aspect, this kind of a learning to develop our meditation to the point where we have jhanas. That's very important. And it's taught by all the great teachers. And the other aspect, one of the other things that we did in this meditation that's also a good thing is there's this intuitive aspect to our mind that we can kind of tap into. In other words, we can learn to ask ourselves questions. Like what's the best way to breathe right now? And then amazingly, the body responds. How can I breathe in a way that's really comfortable, right? It's not necessarily this kind of clunky thing we're thinking, what's the most comfortable way to breathe? I'm going to breathe with a big, I'm going to breathe deep. You just ask the question and the body responds. And so a lot of the changes that we want to make in our breath, they actually come from this kind of subtle manipulation. You can do a coarse manipulation too, but when our mind starts to settle down, the changes we want to make are more subtle. So you just start to ask yourself, do this, breathe lighter, just think it, and then let the body respond on its own. And this also occurs with problems that we have in our life, Sometimes there's a kind of way that we can solve them intuitively. In other words, we pose a question in our mind, We say, what should I do about this? And we sit down to meditate with that question in mind. We don't manipulate it at all. When we finish meditating, see if the answer arises. And there's no guarantee that the answer will be correct. But it's got a better chance. So a lot of very good things can happen like this when we learn to access this intuitive aspect of our practice. It doesn't just stay on the cushion, this ability to ask questions of ourselves. That ability to ask questions is what actually ferrets out the defilements in our mind when we're meditating and outside. We've got to be able to ask, what is it that pulls me off? And then find out how to stop it. So those are these kind of two things that came out of the last portion of the meditation. That is being able to ask questions and being able to spread feelings throughout one's body, especially trying to develop meditation to the level of jhana. Learning to spread those throughout one's body and keep it consistent. So are there any questions on that? Yeah.
I have a question. When the mind is totally unbalanced, very stressed out, like most people that they are these days, how do you bring it to some certain level of peace to be able to even meditate properly? So to get out of that wrap of the mind, the stress, because your nervous system is working differently and you can't even bring it down, that tension to focus and to watch the breath and to observe.
Yeah, so this is a thing where it requires like a level of skill, right? Because some of these tensions can be from a number of different things, right? So if we feel a lot of tension and stress because we've just been busy, right, just running around, then that's something that should calm down just with meditation, If we're feeling a level of tension and stress because we have unwholesome intentions that we're not letting go of, meditation won't stop that. It'd be like this kind of train. We have the tracks shifted to the right. We want to go left, but the tracks are already to the right, so our intentions are to the right. So we send the train down there. It's not going anywhere. It might get derailed, So in other words, this is why we have the 5 precepts as a basis. We have generosity as a basis, especially in our careers, our livelihoods. If we have a livelihood that requires us to do immoral things, then it's going to have an effect. There's no way around that. That's a trade-off that we have. So if there's a way to mitigate that within the livelihood, then that's possible. Then do that. Otherwise, it's a trade-off. If we keep doing that, we're going to have the same effects. We have to change our career or occupation. If it's not occupation-based, if it's like family troubles or whatever it is, these things are more possible to manipulate creatively, you know? So same way in our meditation, we try to find these balance points, we ask questions, we try to, you know, tweak it a bit this way, a bit that way. In relationships with people, there's a whole range of options that a person can employ. Many of them nonverbal, you know? In other words, if we're constantly getting into fights, and that's a source of our anxiety, then, you know, the person we're getting into fights with, you know, there may be a variety of reasons we're doing that. It might be us, it might be them. We can manipulate those reasons. We can stop talking to that person for a period of time. We can talk to them less. We can talk to them about different topics. In other words, this is another area, because lay people's lives are so different, you know? So many different factors. It's an area where we have to have the principles of the teachings, 5 precepts, and generosity, you know? And we have to look to see what it is that's pulling us off from those in our life. Kind of investigate that. So, fortunately, can't give a kind of, like a set answer that's the same for everybody. You know? That's why we have like teachers or whatever.
The lay life is more kind of a persona that you put out there, and you have to maintain that persona.
Oh.
And to maintain that persona has a lot of, sometimes it doesn't fit within the 5 precepts. It just requires some, every persona requires lies and deceit. So, and it creates a lot of stress for people, especially when you have a career and you're within organization and you have to deal with people. So that creates a lot more stress, and then the nature of your job. So when you're in that situation, how do you bring balance to your life, and how do you find your own peace?
Well, basically, I mean, if it's a job like you're working in a slaughterhouse, then you have to change your job.
It doesn't have to be slaughterhouse. You know, in a bank or a hospital or
sure.
a big organization,
sure.
People, it brings a lot of stress.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, if people aren't meditating at all, to come up with a regular meditation practice is important. If people aren't giving at all, like their life is just about getting money to consume things, have to start coming up with a regular practice of giving. Whether it's dana at the temples, whether the people we live with. If we're not keeping the 5 precepts, then we have to start finding a way to keep them, irrespective of our career, because our mind is most important, you know? So, of course, that's the general advice, right? Like, I mean, this is what, if somebody was like a teacher, say, like, you know, if there was a monk who knew about what was going on in that person's life, then, you know, depending on, they could try their best to give advice tailored to that, right? But just as a general thing, people have to put on fronts and lie and do these things in a job. Well, the solution to that is keeping the 5 precepts for if you're lying. If you're really stingy and selfish, the solution to that is giving. If you're not practicing meditation at all and your mind's all over the place, the solution is to start practicing meditation regularly. It's those things, yeah. Okay, any other questions on that?
So it has to come in that order, like Bhante, was the 5 precepts, and then the dana, and then samadhi.
It doesn't.
All together, all 3 together, like.
Yeah, you need them all, but it's like eating and drinking, right? So, I mean, no order. You got to have them both. Eat and drink. Yeah. So, but as a basis, you know, 5 precepts are the most basic. Mm-hmm. You know, although you can meditate not on the 5 precepts and be generous, that's the basis. You know, having the 5 precepts, mm-hmm. including intoxicants. That's the one where most people get pulled off these days. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's tons of addictions these days. It doesn't have to be intoxicants. Like there's a lot of ways to be addicted. It's just the pool is very strong, like the social media, the binge watching, the binge eating, anything you can do pretty much in access to just divert your mind off of what is going on right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, a lot of different ways that a person can get addicted now, aside from just intoxicating substances. So, yeah, things to watch out for. Not to make everybody depressed, right? I mean, it's possible to. It's not like things are terrible. I mean, but it is possible to train yourself in line with those.
I have a personal question. Like, how to keep your mind motivated and kind of happy? Like sometimes, like I feel even as a monk life, or even as a simple lay life, that you kind of been able to think, simplify a lot of it. you do fall into these states of kind of lethargic and kind of not motivated. How do you bring back the motivation to also continue on Dhamma and also to continue with life? Because it's a hustle at the end of the day. You need to have that passion and energy for it too. How do you go about that?
Yeah, so I mean, some things are possible to build up motivation through like the sense of inspiration, like things are great. And other types of energy are just a matter of endurance. So actually when you go to train as a monk, what gets emphasized all the time are three qualities basically, especially in Thailand, where they have these very impressive meditators, like people who sleep 4 hours a day and meditate 10 hours, and they stay up all night on the Wampa meditating. And basically the advice that they continuously tend to give is put forth effort, endure, and then what also comes through is be like creative, or have ingenuity in solving problems for yourself. So a lot of those ajahns, like if you're in one of those situations, then the motivation part of it comes from the group members, because you have many people around you who are putting forth effort, and if you start to not, then people kind of look like, what's this guy doing? You kind of feel bad. That's one way, But the other way is that when you leave that situation, because you don't live there forever, is that you basically have to have this sense that I'm going to do this no matter what. Like you have to have a sense of why it's important, like A, why you want to accomplish the goal, B, what your goal is, and then you have to sacrifice things to get there, So whenever this kind of sense of laziness arises, like I don't want to do it, the unfortunate thing is sometimes the solution to that is just to push through and endure. Like that gets emphasized so strongly as a monk. Endure, 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 And it's because when we go to do something that's beneficial but unpleasant, it has an unpleasant aspect to it, so we just have to put up with it. It's an important part of training the mind. And then as we continue to do this, we continue to endure. It's like when being a little kid, like when I was a kid, I remember cutting my finger by accident, and I was just so freaked out. Like I just started crying, like, oh God, I'm gonna die. It was like all this blood, I'd never seen it. And I was just terrified. But now it's like an adult, right? You'll go walking in the forest, you'll have a cut, and you're like, oh, I got cut. I didn't even notice that, right? And so in the same way as we practice endurance, we don't feel motivated to meditate, but we do anyways. The more we do that, the less that feeling of motivation, we even notice it. It starts to factor into our calculations of why we do things less and less. It becomes like that kind of scratch. If we pay attention to it and follow it, it becomes larger. So this is an area where endurance can be very helpful. Yeah.
So it's about the Sangha. You have to have the community around yourself in order to motivate yourself.
No, not necessarily, no. It's that's one way. But the other way is through this endurance. It's an internal quality. Actually, most of the Buddha's recommendations are to practice meditation alone after you've been meditating with a group. And we're alone all the time with our minds. So we can't rely, after an initial period of training, that's very helpful. We can't rely solely on other people to provide motivation for us. It has to be internal, which is why these ajahns constantly recommend A, putting forth effort. In other words, go for it. B, enduring whatever painful feelings arise. Just have to put up with them. They lessen, C, become ingenious or use ingenuity. Whatever problem is arising in our practice, there's not going to be specific advice from another person for that problem every time. So we have to learn how to use these tools to solve them ourselves. Those three things get constantly emphasized. So in terms of the problem of just this lethargy, it's probably what, if we were in Thailand and asked that from one of the Kruba Ajahns who's really excellent, it would probably be an answer similar to that, endure. Oton. Oton. Just one word, not even like 10 like I gave. Oton. Yeah. Yeah.
But for a beginner, it's good to have like Kalyanamitta.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's not something we have to choose, right? Like between either only doing it alone or doing it with another person. If we are in a situation where we're not surrounded by people who are motivating us, then we have to do it alone.
Right.
Otherwise, it's not going to get done, right? So it's another one of those things where it's not like A, B, C. It's like, yeah.
We were talking during lunch about your background. How did you become a monk?
Oh, me? It was actually kind of funny. Well, when I was young, I used to like to debate a lot, and I used to debate. I'm not like that now, but I used to be very anti-religious, like all religion. I thought it was all kind of lies. I was very pro-science, and so I used to debate with whoever was religious. And I sometimes, just to poke people, I'd tell them I didn't know anything about Buddhism, but I'd be like, I'm a Buddhist. I believe in reincarnation, and I would just say that to poke them. And so it was in high school, my mother one day got me this book as a joke called If the Buddha Dated, because I was looking for a girlfriend too. And it was like one of these Chatelaine type books that you think you're never going to read. And so actually I never intended to read it. And this is where please forgive me, one day I had nothing to read in the bathroom. So I brought the book in and I was reading it, and it was like, okay, here's a central tenet of the Buddhism, which is the Four Noble Truths. And I was like, all right, I'm going to argue with this. There's going to be huge holes in it, like every other philosophy that I feel like I've found, and that's it, And I read it, and I left the bathroom a Buddhist. So that was that was my kind of conversion to Buddhism. Yeah, and then from there I just started meditating in Toronto, and then I moved in full-time at a temple in Toronto, a Zen temple. And then after a while, I started to feel more affinity with Theravada teaching, so then I moved to a monastery in Perth, and then I ordained as a monk there, and I stayed there for 5 years after becoming a monk, and then I went to California, and then I came to Toronto, and now I'm here. So that's a short rundown.
You studied with Sam, right, Bhante?
Yeah.
Yeah.